If you're a regular viewer on my channel, you would know that I talk a lot about studying your periods, getting to know about your periods. And you might have just been thinking, what do I even study about my periods? Or what do I get to know about my period? What do I really need to know about my period? Well, in this video, I've got you covered because I'll be looking at how to study your periods and, most importantly, the 5 things which you need to know about your period. So just sit tight with me. Let's get in. Hello and welcome to Case Corner. My name is Karen and I am so glad that you are here with me and watching this video. Today I'm looking at how to study your periods and, most importantly, 5 things which you need to know about your periods. Now, studying your periods is really very important because it forms the basis of every other action which you take about your periods. Whether something is going wrong or something is not going the way it has to go as far as your periods, the fact that you get to know your period is the basis on which you're going to take any action or not. So let's just dive in. The first thing which you need to know about your period is your cycle length. So how long your cycle is. Now, your cycle is the period of time between one period and the start of the next period. Or simply put, when you have your periods, that first day when the period started and the day before the next period starts is what you call your cycle. So you want to know how long that is. Now, that really means that you would study that retrospectively, meaning that you would have to have your periods for a certain length of time, perhaps 3, 4, 5. I usually recommend 6 months. And then as you calculate this period, you begin to see that, all right, my cycle length is 31 days or 28 days or 30 days. What that means is that from the first day of one period to the day before the next period starts is 35 days or 28 days or 27 days or whatever the case may be. Let me show you what this looks like. So let's just imagine that you had your period on the 5th of April. So this is April. And then you had your next period on the 4th of May. This period starting the 5th of April right up to the day before the 4th of May. So that's the 3rd of May is what we would call your cycle. So that's your cycle. The next one would be from the 4th of May, and let's just imagine that you had your period on the 7th of June. So that's 7th of June. Your cycle length for that period will be from the 4th of May to the day before the 7th of June, so the 6th of June. So this is your cycle length here, the number of days here and the number of days here. And you would have to do this for about 6 months. I usually recommend 6 months. And then what you do is to get the total of days in each of these periods. So let's just imagine that this one was, say, 30 days. And this one was 29 days. And the next one is 31 days. And the next one is 27 days. So if you do all of that for, say, 5 months, 6 months, you're going to take the total of these days, add them together. Let's imagine that it gives you 151 days. That's just imagining, I haven't put all of this together. But let's just imagine that it gives you that total. You'd have to divide that by the number of months. So if you did for 5 months, you divide that by 5. And if you did for 6 months, you divide it by 6. Whatever you get from that, so imagine 151 on 6 or 151 on 5, whatever figure it gives you, let's just imagine that it gives you 30 or it gives you 29. That figure which you get is your cycle length averagely. you need to study this for a short period of time. And I'm saying short period just because, well, you have your periods for quite a long time. But please remember that you have to take the time to study your periods and see what happens each month, put that together and get the average. The only reason why I've done it this way is because there's a video which I've already done on how to know your next period, and I've worked this out for you in that video, and I'll put it in the description so you can have a look and then you get the details on how to go on with this calculation. So that's how you calculate your cycle length. Remember that on some months it's going to be longer and some months will be shorter. But when you do this calculation over 4, 5, 6 months and you get to know what your cycle length is, that will be the average, And so when some days get longer or some days get shorter, it doesn't really worry you because you know that this is my average. Now, remember that if it gets excessively shorter or excessively longer than usual, then you need to seek medical help. Second thing which you need to know about your period is your period length. We've just talked about your cycle length, and now I'm talking about your period length. That is actually the number of days you bleed for. So if you start bleeding on the 31st of January and you finish on the 4th of February, you need to start counting from the first day when the bleeding started. So 31st, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th. So your period length is 5 days. And again, you do the calculation exactly like you did for the cycle length. So monitor that for about 4, 5, 6 periods, and then you take the total of days and you divide that by the number of months for which you have studied, and that will give you the average length of your period. So you know that on the average, I bleed for 5 days. On the average, I bleed for 6 days, for 7 days, for 4 days. And the reason you need to know this is so that when there is a deviation from this, you are either seeking medical help or you know that it's just by 1 day, it's just by 2 days, it's okay. So if you normally bleed, or if on the average you bleed for 3 days, and then you discover that you started bleeding for 7 days, that's a red flag. Don't stay at home. Something may be wrong. You need to go to the hospital. Or if you normally bleed for 7 days, for 6 days, and then you start noticing that you're only bleeding for 3 days, please don't just stay at home. You need to go seek some medical help so that if there's anything happening, they can do some investigations and then help you out. But it's really important that you know what your period length is. The third thing which you need to know about your period is your period blood flow. So basically how much you bleed. And you just want to know this because you want to determine whether you are a light bleeder, or you bleed just medium, or you bleed heavily. And the easiest way to know this is by monitoring or taking time to study how many pads or tampons or whatever you're using per day you use. How many do you change? Now, generally the advice is just to make sure that you do not keep a pad or a tampon on for more than 4 hours. All right. But then this depends on how much you bleed, to be very honest. There are some people who change their pads not because the pads are fully soaked, but just because they are uncomfortable with, the whole concept of blood in the pad, and they're wearing it about. But there are some people who also want the pads to be completely soaked before they change it. Now, when you're studying your periods, you just want to be sure that your pad is soaked. It doesn't have to be fully soaked and kind of overflowing, but just try and monitor how many pads you have to change when it's fully soaked, or how many tampons you have to change when it's fully soaked or completely soaked. Now, that will determine how many pads you use and will give you an idea about how much you bleed. Now, just imagine that you have to change your pads, say, 6 times a day, and each time you change your pads, they are completely soaked. That's completely different from somebody who barely, struggles to change their pads 4 times a day, and they're just changing 4 times a day just so that, they're changing their pads. Now, if that's a normal thing for you in your mind, all right, that's normal for me. If there's a deviation from this, then I have to start seeking medical help. It's important that all right, when I have my periods, I normally change, say, 4 times a day. My pads are normally soaked, not heavily, just normal, but I don't really need to change more than 4 times. If you then start changing 8 times a day under the same conditions, you know that something is not quite right. But then if you did not take the time to study your periods in that wise, you didn't take the time to see whether, how much you bleed, you know that when things start changing, you wouldn't even know. And then you just stay at home and something could be going wrong and you wouldn't do anything about it. On the other hand, you could be panicking when there's actually nothing to panic about. It's just your periods, your periods just have stayed the way they normally are, but because you haven't really taken the time to study your period in terms of how much you bleed, it's just making you panic over nothing. Again, talking about your periods, you want to look at the quality of the flow. Do I bleed in gushes, or do I bleed with clots, or how does my flow happen? There are some people who realize that during the day it looks like they're not really bleeding, but the moment they start wanting to go to toilets, or the moment they are laughing or something like that, they have like massive gushes. You just want to know all of those things when it comes to your periods, and the reason is so that you know what your baseline is, so that anything out of the ordinary for you is something which you want to kind of investigate. Remember that what happens to one woman is not the same thing that may happen to another woman. So just because somebody tells you, oh, I change my pads 8 times a day, doesn't necessarily mean that you bleed that much. So you need to study your own periods for yourself so that you don't panic when things are normal, or you don't stay at home when you need to go to the hospital. Now let's move on to the 4th thing which you need to study when it comes to your menstrual periods. But before I do that, if you're having any benefit from this video, please like the video, don't forget to share it, and don't forget to turn on your notification bell so that you do not miss out on any of these videos when I load them. Why not consider subscribing to the channel as well? Thank you, and God bless you as you do that. So the 4th thing which you need to know about your periods, and again which is going to come by just taking time to study your periods, and study just means observing what happens to you when you have your periods, would be the other things that happen to your body when you are on your periods, or just leading up to your periods. So you want to understand things like, say, the cramps. Do you normally have cramps during your periods? How bad are the cramps? Or do you have cramps during your ovulation? How bad are those cramps? What other things happen? Do you get a headache? Are you normally dizzy? Do you normally have fatigue? Do you normally have a waist pain? What does your psychological output looks like? How emotionally stable are you during your period? You want to understand that, so that when things get out of the ordinary, you know. But also so that when you start behaving kind of out of the ordinary, and what I mean there is when you start having those emotional outbursts, you yourself understand that this is about my periods. I really don't mean to shout at somebody, or I don't really mean to just behave abnormally. It's my periods. And then when you know that it's your periods, you're able to control yourself. You're able to just put yourself a little bit in order. But when you do not know that, it's difficult to even explain to the people around you, because you don't even know what's happening to your body. And that's because you haven't taken the time to study yourself about all the other things that happen to you during your period. So summarily, what I'm really saying is the fact that you need to know all the other things that happen to your body, or that you experience when you have your periods. Because not everybody has all of those things. Not everybody has a headache. Not every woman has got waist pain. Not every woman has got the fatigue, So you need to know what is normal for you, so that when it then gets abnormal, you know when to seek medical help. The 5th thing which you need to know about when it comes to your periods is about the other characteristics of your whole cycle, not just those 5-6 days when you have your period. So your whole cycle, and to be honest, that just means your whole reproductive cycle. Now what I mean is, there are some things which you need to look at. For example, what does your vaginal discharge look like? What does your skin look like at the different stages of your menstrual cycle? So for example, do you have breakouts or pimples normally, or do you only have them when you're ovulating or when you have your periods? And the reason you need to know this is because you may need to alter skincare routine during that period. You know, have your vaginal discharges changed? You know, what are the things that happen in your whole cycle, just leading up to your periods or immediately after your periods? Again, the reason why you need to know this is so that if there's anything happening which doesn't normally happen to you, you know when to seek medical help, or you even just know when to think, this is normal. This is just something that normally happens and I'm okay, you know, so you don't panic, you don't become anxious over what is a normal thing for you. So take the time to study yourself. Take the time to study your own cycle so that you are a master of your cycle and nobody can tell you anything else. Now that you know how to study your menstrual period, why not watch this video which I've left on here, and I'll also leave the link to that video in the description about how to know the next date for your menstrual period so that your periods don't catch you off guard and they don't come unexpected. Thank you for watching. God bless you, and I'll see you in the next video.